Before first light yesterday, a ghostly grey dawn draped eastern Ukraine. On remote radar screens, several flight paths flickered into view. Unfamiliar, unmatched by known Russian or Iranian systems. The signatures did not match Russian or Iranian ordnance. Analysts realized, with mounting alarm, that these were something altogether different, almost certainly of North Korean origin. These rockets were purportedly part of Pyongyang's eagerly touted $700 million Hwasong expansion initiative, a bold statement that North Korea could furnish Russia with modern missile systems. Yet rather than a display of strength, the launch became a spectacular failure. The rockets misfired almost instantly. The misadventure laid bare fissures in the covert Pyongyang-Moscow alliance and showcased just how deeply Ukraine had penetrated their rear networks. For months, intelligence agencies had tracked a growing arms pipeline linking the two isolated nations. Russia, desperate for munitions and short on precision missiles, sought North Korea's stockpiles of short-range ballistic rockets and artillery. In exchange, Pyongyang received oil, food, and access to Russian missile telemetry data, the kind of information that could accelerate its own weapons development. On paper, it was transactional and tidy. Russia would draw on North Korea's missile stockpiles. In return, Pyongyang would receive oil, foodstuffs, and valuable telemetry from Russia's missile systems. But unknown to both sides, Ukraine's cyber and signals units were already watching, intercepting their communications, logistics, and financial transactions. By mid-September, Ukrainian intelligence had built a plan called Operation Polar Flame. Its purpose was not simply to intercept the incoming rockets, but to expose them and the countries behind them. Ukraine's air defense network, a fusion of Western systems and homegrown radar, would lure the North Korean missiles into designated interception zones. Once inside, the projectiles would be destroyed, their telemetry captured, and their weaknesses studied. The mission's real goal was to cripple North Korea's credibility as an arms supplier and to demonstrate, once again, that Russia's network of sanctioned partners could be turned against itself. The $700 million rocket program had been Kim Jong-un's pride. North Korea had spent years refining short-range systems modeled after Russia's Iskander missiles. Russian generals, facing shortages, saw these rockets as a quick replacement for their own dwindling stock. The first shipments left Pyongyang's docks disguised as agricultural cargo and arrived at the Russian port of Vostochny in late August. From there, trains carried them across Siberia and into occupied Ukrainian territory. What neither Russian nor North Korean engineers suspected was that Ukrainian operatives had already embedded malicious code into the calibration software used by Pyongyang's technicians. The malware was subtle. It didn't crash systems or raise alarms. Instead, it introduced microscopic errors into the gyroscope alignment and targeting algorithms. Those errors multiplied during flight. When Russian and North Korean crews prepared for launch near Luhansk, the interfaces appeared normal. But beneath the surface, every calculation was slightly wrong. At 4:15 a.m., the first rockets ignited seconds into their flights. They deviated dangerously. One detonated shortly after liftoff. Another curled back toward its launch pad and exploded near Russian-held terrain. Ukraine's air defenses, pre-synced to intercept these exact trajectories, struck down the rest. The much-vaunted missiles turned into falling debris. At dawn, Ukrainian troops combed the wreckage and retrieved mangled fragments, the stenciled Korean markings still legible. The discovery confirmed what many intelligence agencies had suspected, that North Korea was quietly arming Russia. What was meant to be a demonstration of new weaponry had turned into a global embarrassment. Russian state media, which had prepared a victory broadcast, fell silent. Ukrainian officials, however, celebrated in their own way, releasing a single image of the wreckage with the caption, "Gravity is our strongest ally." Behind this moment of triumph were months of preparation. Ukraine's security service, SBU, had tracked North Korean advisors working in occupied Luhansk, posing as maintenance experts. Their laptop traffic contained encryption patterns identical to those used in previous North Korean missile tests. Ukraine's cyber teams exploited this by spoofing Russian command systems, feeding the North Korean technicians false data about Ukrainian radar coverage and troop positions. Thinking they had found a blind spot, the advisors programmed their missiles to fly through it, unaware that it was actually the center of Ukraine's trap. When the rockets launched, Ukraine's Patriot, NASAMS, and Buk M1 systems were already in synchronized formation. Within minutes, the missiles were annihilated. The operation's success sent shockwaves far beyond the battlefield. Intelligence sharing networks across Europe confirmed that the destroyed weapons matched the specifications of North Korea's KN-23 series, short-range ballistic missiles modified for Russian use. Satellite photos later showed shipping containers labeled with the name of a North Korean defense exporter, leaving no doubt about their origin. The consequences were immediate. Moscow faced global humiliation. Pyongyang faced an economic crisis. The $700 million contract, one of North Korea's largest foreign ventures since sanctions began in 2017, was suddenly worthless. The deal had promised rockets, spares, and support in exchange for fuel and Russian hard currency. Now, with footage of burning wreckage circulating online, no buyer would trust North Korea's exports again. For Kim Jong-un, who had built his economy around selling weapons and cyber tools abroad, this failure struck at the heart of his regime's finances. Inside Pyongyang, the fallout was severe. Reports from South Korea suggested several engineers and defense officials were detained for technical negligence. State media blamed foreign sabotage and imperialist cyber attacks, but few believed the excuses. The damage was visible and undeniable. In diplomatic circles, countries that had been negotiating arms deals with North Korea, from Syria to parts of Africa, suspended talks. Even Iran reportedly distanced itself, unwilling to associate with what analysts now called the most expensive misfire in modern arms trade. For Russia, the debacle carried deep strategic costs. The Kremlin had bet on North Korean weapons to fill gaps in its arsenal. Their failure not only exposed Moscow's desperation, but also cracked the illusion of self-sufficiency. Inside the Russian Ministry of Defense, blame spread quickly. Officers accused procurement heads of ignoring warnings about poor North Korean quality. One engineer described the rockets as museum relics with a new coat of paint. The fiasco underscored how far Russia's military industry had fallen under sanctions, and how risky its reliance on isolated allies had become. While Russia struggled to manage the narrative, Ukraine stayed quiet. Deliberate silence formed part of the plan. Every hour of Russian uncertainty deepened internal mistrust. As the Kremlin debated how the sabotage had happened, Ukraine's intelligence units catalogued every fragment of wreckage. Lab tests revealed corroded circuits, mismatched serial numbers, and moisture-damaged boards, evidence of cheap manufacturing and rushed assembly. More critically, many components carried Chinese markings, suggesting that commercial suppliers from China had indirectly supported the project. Beijing denied involvement, but the discovery complicated its diplomatic stance. In Kyiv, analysts called it a complete intelligence victory. For years, Ukraine had been seen mainly as a foreign aid recipient. Now, it has become a producer of intelligence that reshaped global security conversations. Western defense partners arrived to study the operation, calling it a masterclass in modern hybrid warfare. Ukraine had fused cyber deception, electronic warfare, and real-time data analysis into a single synchronized strike. It was proof that warfare had entered a new era, where information, not just weapons, determines outcomes. The international reaction grew by the hour. At the United Nations, an emergency meeting was called to review Ukraine's evidence. Delegates examined debris and telemetry data showing North Korean design signatures. For the first time, Pyongyang's exports were treated not as a regional problem, but as a global security threat. South Korea and Japan swiftly imposed new sanctions on North Korean research entities and shipping brokers tied to the deal. The move signaled a regional consensus that Pyongyang's involvement in the Ukraine war had crossed a red line. Meanwhile, in Washington and Brussels, officials praised Ukraine's intelligence community for exposing the covert weapons market that kept Russia's invasion afloat. Some NATO members began pushing to deepen information sharing with Kyiv, effectively granting it near-member intelligence privileges. Ukraine, once viewed as a battlefield state, was now seen as a strategic intelligence partner. In contrast, Russia's diplomatic isolation worsened. The failure of North Korea's rockets forced Moscow to rely even more on Iranian drones and limited domestic production. But these resources were already stretched thin. The collapse of the Pyongyang deal shattered the myth of a new axis of resilience, the idea that Russia could sustain its war through partnerships with other sanctioned states. If one ally's missiles could self-destruct on launch, how reliable were the rest? The broader lesson was clear. Ukraine has shown that modern warfare is not only fought with weapons, but with information, deception, and precision timing. By hacking and misleading its enemies, it turned their own systems into weaknesses. Authoritarian regimes like Russia and North Korea depend on secrecy and rigid control. Ukraine used that secrecy against them, proving that even the tightest alliances can be broken by data and patience. In Pyongyang, the propaganda machine tried to spin the failure as a malfunction due to foreign interference, but no one bought it. The footage of missiles disintegrating mid-air was undeniable. For Kim Jong-un, the political cost was as heavy as the economic one. His ambition of becoming a global arms supplier lay in ruins over Ukraine, and the world was watching. As night returned to Kyiv exactly 24 hours later, the skies were quiet. The debris had been cleared. The analysis was complete. The message had already traveled across capitals and intelligence networks. Ukraine had not only survived another assault, it had turned an enemy's billion-dollar plan into rubble. President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a brief address, summed it up simply: every weapon sent to destroy Ukraine becomes a lesson for the world, a lesson in how truth and intelligence defeat aggression. And so, the story of North Korea's $700 million rocket program ended where it began, in smoke and failure, caught in a trap that worked perfectly.